Welcome to the Secure the Perimeter podcast.
Thank you, everyone, for joining the Secure the Perimeter podcast. This is a podcast where we help leaders build strong lives, lasting legacies, and unshakable business. And with us today is a legend in this space, entrepreneurship. I want to talk today about Mr. Eddie Wilson. He's joining us on the Secure the Perimeter podcast. Got lots of questions for Eddie, but basically, we're going to do what most entrepreneurs are looking to do. We're going to help you fortify your foundation in your business. And so Eddie's going to help us do that today by talking about tips and tricks that he uses in business. We're also going to talk about Eddie's book, The Titan Doctrine. Highly, highly, highly recommend this book. It is a phenomenal book because it's not only principles that Eddie talks about, but it's also he uses examples of leaders in our past, people like Winston Churchill, George Washington, and other people that were monumental in carving and paving the way for not only us as a society, but how we think of things as leaders. And so Eddie is a serial entrepreneur, if I've ever met a serial entrepreneur. He is also an investor and a CEO. He's still CEO of his own businesses. We'll talk about that today in our episode. But he has bought and sold more than 100 businesses. Is that right, Eddie?
That's correct. Yes, sir.
Yeah, bought and sold more than 100 businesses. That is what we call insane. It's pretty, and so it kind of proves the points that we make here and the principles and the steps that we talk about, Eddie, on how you're able to do that, and not only just grow and scale, but also move through your 5 steps, as you call it, right? We'll talk about that. So beyond Eddie's resume, and this is one of the things that I like about Eddie the most, and really what inspired me to get Eddie on our podcast, is he is a kingdom man. And he talks a lot about his faith and how important his faith is to him, and how he uses his faith to be not only a leader, but also an exceptional entrepreneur. So he's built media companies, real estate empires, and other leadership platforms still currently today. And so he's done it while keeping a strong foundation in his faith. So without further ado, thank you, Eddie, for joining the Secure the Perimeter podcast. It's great to have you on our podcast. And I know people call you the king of exits, but I like to call it a king of building great businesses. So thanks for joining the Secure the Perimeter podcast, Eddie.
Thank you. Appreciate you having me on the show today.
So we're going to get the first phase of this, Eddie, is we're going to get into, I'd like to talk to you a lot about life, because I like to regard life as the outer perimeter, right? And so when Marines move into any area, the first thing we do, the helo moves in, Marines extract out the back, or we rappel in, and we lock down the perimeter. We set up what we call a hasty 360, and we secure the perimeter. In business, I like to call the outer perimeter the life perimeter, because we have to do life. And so for you, before we build anything external, we have to build an internal perimeter. How do you do that, in business?
Sure. Yeah. For me, I very much believe that if the leader is not growing, then the entity is not growing, the asset's not growing. And so, first of all, in order to kind of fortify life, I have to be in a consistent state of growth. I can't just reach a pinnacle and then sit there. I have to continue to move. I have to continue to grow. And life kind of does that to you whether you like it or not. I have 3 boys, and raising 3 boys, you don't really have a choice, than to continue to grow and continue to develop. Raising my first son was very different than my third son. And so in life, I think being present in all the opportunities we have gives us opportunities for growth. And then in the pursuit of greatness, that growth becomes very natural. Um, and I think that oftentimes that's where people get in trouble. They feel like there's a pinnacle or there's a peak that they're trying to reach. And once they reach it, they begin to rest. And in resting is typically when you find the biggest issues in life. You know, when you find boredom, you find idle hands, you find rest. Oftentimes you find trouble. And so in you know, your point, that outer space, that life, part of it is developing self. It's being real with those around me. It's being present in their lives. And then very much faith is a huge part of what I do. And so having faith that is the underpinnings of that growth and in that pursuit, that I'm in pursuit of something greater than me, right? Like something that I can never achieve perfection, but I'm in the pursuit of perfection. You know, that faith is so important to that. And so I think there's an element of confidence, but yet humility that allows you to kind of get there, but also always be in pursuit. And then, you know, I think that would be kind of the way that I do it in my life.
Sure. And I think, you know, in saying that, Eddie, I think that in business, you have to be very definitive. I think a lot of entrepreneurs struggle with that. And I talked about that in one of the past podcasts. As an entrepreneur, you have to be very definitive. And because a definitive person makes decisions and executes on those decisions, they're not wish-washy or back and forth. And so talk to me about how you stay grounded, you know, in all of that.
Yeah, I mean, that's a really, really great point. Horowitz, in his book on, I think it's Why the Hard Things Are Hard, or Why Hard Things Are Hard, he talks about oftentimes that you don't win wars with one silver bullet. He says you typically win a war with 10,000 lead bullets. And I think that in that concept, you have to be willing to make a definitive choice while being okay with failure, because I'm not on the path of perfection. I'm on the path of iterations, right? So like the way that I look at my business and my life is I'm going to make a choice, right or wrong, today. I'm going to typically make that choice with as much data and information as I can. And we're going to go down that path. But I'm going to be willing to fail, because next week I'm also going to have an iteration where I'm going to redo that choice. And so I look at I reconcile the finances in every company I have and personally every single week. Why? Because if I'm going to beat the store down the street, who, you know, it's like I'm building one of the fastest growing coffee companies in the nation right now. And the reason I can beat Starbucks is because Starbucks looks at their financials once a month. I look at my financials truly every single week. And while I might fail this week, I'm not going to fail next week. And I'm not going to fail the week after. So I get 52 chances at making right choices.
Interesting.
So I believe in iterations. In iterations, I can have small failures, but I don't have great failures. And so there's a pursuit of greatness in that I refuse to just ever get to a point where I'm setting still and I am okay with the results I have. So that's very much the methodology I use and how I grow and scale my companies.
So I love that. And that's very interesting. And you say that. So you look at the financials of all of your businesses every week. That is an awesome way to look at metrics. You have to know your numbers. I mean, that's one of the key principles of running any organization or any business, right? I think that also keeps you in tune with where to make win-sale adjustments, right? And I think that's vital in any organization, and that's astounding. Yeah. So how do you know, for you, Eddie, obviously you're busy, you got a lot of things going on, you're involved in a lot of things, and you talked about your coffee company. For those that don't know what coffee company Eddie's talking about, he has a coffee company called Just Because Coffee, right? Isn't it Just Because Coffee?
Yeah, Because Coffee is the actual like roastery, so that's where we're bringing coffee in, and then our retail shops are called Myth and Legend Coffee House, and those are the ones that are expanding all over the Southeast.
Nice. And so what kind of a business, what's the go-to on that coffee business?
Yeah, so Because Coffee, we have I've moved into this place in life where I've sold quite a few companies, we've had some large sums and exits. I just got to the place where I was completely unfulfilled and really moved to this place of what I call cause capitalism, where I literally very much believe in capitalism, and every business should make money, but that money that it makes should go to make impact on the world. And so the coffee company is called Because Coffee. We only roast the top 2% of the world's coffee. We bring it in from all over the world, ship it in, roast it out of Atlanta, Georgia. Then we send it to our retail shops. But the cause in Because is not just the coffee. It's something greater than the coffee, which is making impact around the world. So whether it's the farms that we are dealing with, or the orphanages and feeding centers that we support around the world, because of that brand, there's a bigger ecosystem that's tied to it. And it's interesting because when we set out for the coffee company to build it, we built it just like every other company I have, but with complete give back in mind. And I've done that on the last 27 companies I've built. Is gave it a massive give back component. At some point you realize there's not a lot of fulfillment in another dollar, another vacation, another house, whatever it is that everybody else is chasing. But there is fulfillment in making impact on other people's lives. And so when you do something that I feel very innately called and gifted to do, which is business, to then serve a greater purpose, there's true fulfillment in that.
That's amazing. And I think, it sounds to me like you regard that as your civic duty, right? And I think you're right, Eddie. I think every entrepreneur that grows any organization and a business really should give back to the same community that fed the fuel of their own business.
Sure.
So I think that's awesome. And so we'll summarize the first layer here of the podcast. We're talking about life. How do you've probably experienced running 100 organizations, 100 businesses, CEO burnout. What are your indicators when you know that you're experiencing burnout? What are your KPIs? A lot of entrepreneurs ask me these questions a lot. Hey, Brent, what is CEO burnout? When do I know that I'm in the midst of CEO burnout? And I always tell them, when you know, you'll know. So, but for you, Eddie, what are your what are your indicators knowing that you're getting tapped out?
Yeah. Before I give you those numbers, I'd like to disclaim it by saying my numbers, my information is not anyone else's information. When I was in my 20s and trying to manage big organizations, I had ulcers because I couldn't deal with the thought of like this massive burden or weight of producing enough capital to care for the families and the people and the stress. Today, I don't have stress over those things. I don't think about it. It's just a part of the nature of growth. And so no matter where anyone's at on the journey, I think that those goalposts change, so for me, working 70, 80 hours a week, I kind of enjoy it. I don't mind working the hours. I enjoy it. It gives me some sense of satisfaction and fulfillment.
Sure.
But what I notice for me is when I begin to push beyond the ability to take care of myself and take care of the people I love, not financially, but emotionally. When I begin to neglect myself, my workouts, my health routines, all the things that I'm doing, and I begin to allow my personal self to deteriorate, and I've got 3 boys, it's like, so for me, it's like I know when I'm creating an element of suffering in their life because I'm pursuing and pushing too hard. That's when true burnout for me happens, is when I begin to exchange my own health, my own, self for this greater good. And you can only do that for so long, you can stand that pressure for a while. Gary Vee calls it the grind. And it's like, and sometimes we elevate it and we make it sound so great. But in the end, you can only stay under that pressure for so long. At some point, it will break, it will crack. And then oftentimes, it doesn't show up in your own life first. It shows up in the lives of those around you, the ones that are most impressionable. For me, it's my 3 boys. I actually start to see it in their lives long before I see it in my own life. For high entrepreneur, or, high performance people, we push beyond the norm, we push beyond the pain, we push beyond what everybody else thinks is acceptable. That's how we get to where we are. However, oftentimes the people around us aren't created and made to do life that way. And so I see the cracks in my sons, first of all. I see when they feel neglected, they feel like dad's not supporting them in a way that I should. And so that's when burnout truly happens in my life.
So I think of a few things, with you saying that, Eddie, like my routine has been very regiment for almost 13 years now. My wife and I were just talking about this, and literally within the last week, I've started shifting my routine. My day usually starts between 2:30 and 3 o'clock in the morning. I get up, I head to the gym, I run 6 miles, average 6 miles, 6.5 miles, 7 miles. I go to the office, I open up the office, turn everything on, I go back to my house, I shower up, I have coffee in the morning with my wife because by then she's waking up, and then I wake my kids up and spend some time with them in the morning and then see them off to school. But I'm usually waking my kids up in the morning, and that's something I haven't done, man, for almost 13 years. And for me, and I'll do a paradigm shift here for a minute. Being a top performer, being in the military, a former operator, a lot of guys experience what we call PTSD because they live their life being a super performer, almost an elite, freedom fighter. I'll just call it a freedom fighter. And they decide to leave the military. And this happened to me in 2003. I was a career Marine, decided I was going to get out of the Corps, and I wasn't prepared to face almost the complete standstill. So I went from being this top performer in the military and getting out of the Marine Corps, and just I always describe it as smashing the brakes. You go from being super accelerated to being a top performer, and you get out of the military and you go to zero. And it's deflating because you kind of sort of, in a sense, lose that sense of purpose and fulfillment because you have to realign your purpose and your fulfillment all over again. And so for you, you're saying that you see it in your children a lot sooner than you see it in yourself. Obviously, you can take probably a lot of pressure from years of, growth and experience in businesses, whereas your sons don't have that experience like dad does, right?
Mm-hmm.
So, you've indicated how you see those, and I think I see them. But for me, I'm going through this thing right now where I'm literally doing a paradigm shift on my routine and trying to adjust my routine to get back to a normal sense of being there and present for my kids, because I have 3 kids. I have two daughters and a son, and for me it's a bit of a paradigm shift. It's not normal for me. So it's interesting that you say that. So moving on from the outer perimeter into the operational perimeter, and this is obviously I love to talk about business. In the business, in your book, we talked about, introducing your book, The Titan Doctrine. You talked about those 5 steps. What's interesting to me, Eddie, is you're the first one that I've seen really identify those phases of business and not only walk the entrepreneur through it, but show them to identify what phase they're actually in. And I also, I go back to, the first phase being the startup phase. So can you talk to me about the 5 steps,
Sure.
Of business and how that intrinsically relates to every business out there?
Sure. For me, before I figured that out, I had multiple businesses, and I was trying to overlay a system that is off-the-shelf system everybody else was using. I thought, well, I'll use it too. And what happened was it worked in some businesses, but it didn't work in others. And so for me, principles and truth have to work in every situation. So I was trying to just boil it down to fundamental truth, right? Like that red thread I could pull that essentially makes equality among all of them. And so I was trying to find just like that commonality. And what I realized was all businesses are not created equal, and all businesses are not in the same phase. So I couldn't treat my insurance company that maybe had 100 to 200 employees at the time like I was treating my development company that had 2 developers building a tech product, and so I had to treat them very differently. And so when I did that, it very much accelerated my growth, because then it wasn't about growing the business, it was about helping the business get to the next phase of business. And so it came very clear. So I always say there's 5 phases. It starts in startup. Startup phase is usually a predetermined amount of time, a predetermined amount of money. And then you move into perseverance. Perseverance is phase 2. That's the pre-profit phase. That's when you're kind of in and out of profit. You maybe don't quite have the right people in the right seats. You don't have a lot of training. You don't have the operation set. Then you move into viability. That's phase 3. That's right people, right seats, right systems, right processes. You're profitable. It can sustain itself. And then you move into what's called scale phase or scaling. That's phase number 4. And then you move lastly into succession. Those are the 5 phases. The problem is that most people get into perseverance. They're in and out of profit. They don't have the right people in the right seats. They don't have the right systems and processes. And they're trying to scale. They're literally trying to skip an entire phase of business. And that's what I was doing. I was like, ooh, this one looks best. This one actually has a lot of promise. Let's just throw capital, or let's just throw more emphasis or resources towards that business to get it to scale. But I wasn't building right foundations. What I realized is my goal should be to get to viability. Then in viability, I can decide, do I want to make this a lifestyle business that's just producing cash flow, or do I really want to scale this business? The insurance company that I grew, once I realized we were in perseverance, I realized, okay, I have to get this to viability. The way that I did that was moving people around, getting the right people in the right seats, putting the right systems and processes. And then I realized that the lie that I had been told about growing businesses my whole life was in fact a lie. And that was that you have to grow a business slow and methodical. Now, when you build the right foundation, this is where I wholeheartedly agree with so many people, whether it's academically or systematically, is that you should grow a business as fast as it will allow you to grow, and as much as you can stay safe, right? So, for instance, the insurance company, I was at 40 million. We took it to 42 million in viability. I built the right systems, processes, put the right people in the right seat. We went to 200 million a year later, 440 million a year later, over 800 million a year later. So I went from 40 million to 800 million in 5 years. But it was the foundational period. Now, the crazy part is I went from 60 employees to over 4,000 employees. I went from 2 office floors to 6 high-rise buildings, right? So that's a 5-year growth pattern, but it really happened in about a 3-year time period. I sold that company in 2019. And for me, what it set inside of my mind is how important the foundation is, because to the degree that you build a foundation, it provides all of the opportunity for scale.
That's
I was
right.
trying to scale businesses from perseverance. I was stressing them out, and in the end, I was stressing myself out. I was causing pain to me, my employees. When I went from 42 million to over $800 million in revenue annually, we didn't have a lot of pain. We didn't have a lot of, you could go look at the Google reviews during that time period. We didn't have a lot of frustrated customers. And that's because I built the right foundation. So I very much believe in you've got to get to viability. When you get to viability, now you can decide what you want to do with your business. Most people try to go to a conference or something like that. They get pumped up and they try to essentially pour gas on the fire, but the foundation's not correct. And all they do, I liken it to, I had my pilot's license for a little while, and it's like, I liken it to a plane that's in ascent or descent. In ascent, you can throw the throttle down as much as you want, right? In descent, if all you do is throw down the throttle, you just hit the ground faster, right? And so that's what happens with so many businesses is they in descent and they just throw gas on the fire and they just hit the ground faster.
Man, that's interesting. And so I love what you said about viability, Eddie, but without getting in the weeds too far, what do you mean by viability? You want to get a business to viability.
Yeah.
What's the key component?
Key components are 3 things. Number 1, your revenue has to support the business model. If you're still supplementing your business with capital, or you're not paying yourself a payroll, or you're not paying yourself a commensurate salary for what you do, you're not in viability. Number 2, you have to have the right people for growth, right? Now, that doesn't mean that in that phase of business that people don't have multiple hats on. You could still be small and be viable. But you have to have the key roles and responsibilities covered by people that are actually decent and can perform those functions of the business. And number 3, you have to have an operating system that allows you to understand the metrics and the measurables to understand if you're successful or not successful, the know your numbers part. And then I say the 4th thing is this: you have to remove single points of failure. Cross training and
love it.
single points of failure are massive in business, and so and they exist everywhere. If you removed one little piece out of your business and it fails, it's not viable, right? Like
That's right.
you have
Yep.
to have all your single points of failure removed.
Love it. Love it. And I say that all the time in my business. I'm getting rid of choke points and bottlenecks, single points of failure. Essentially, that's exactly what it is.
Yeah.
In the Marine Corps, we call a choke point. We'll move a security team through a choke point when we encounter a danger area. And so we have to move across the danger area. And the way you do that is across through the choke point, because you have to have a unified area in which you move people through. In business, not a good idea, because if you've got one person doing that important thing, or that big task, accounts receivable and payable, and that's the only person that does it. If that's your single point of fit, that person leaves, you could essentially affect the business in a big way. So
Right.
I like how you say that. Eddie, when you're looking at businesses, when you evaluate a business, what are you looking for?
Yeah. There are 5 areas of business that I believe that have to be measured. Number 1, leadership. And oftentimes that's not a person, that's a philosophy, and it's a culture. I say culture loosely. What I mean by culture is a systematic pattern of behaviors, right? Like, we don't ascribe to a culture,
Yep.
we observe the culture, right?
Yep.
Number 2, operations. It's the efficiency of the business. How do they do business? Are they efficient? Do they fulfill what they promise, what they say and what they sell? Number 3, sales and marketing. How do they generate leads? Is there enough potential business to sustain it? Number 4, finance. And number 5, personnel. I evaluate businesses in those 5, what I call the 5 pillars, to really understand where their issues are. Most businesses suffer in one of those 5 areas. And usually, if I can identify what area they suffer in, it's usually a personnel problem in one of those 5 areas. It's almost always a people problem. And so what I do is I typically evaluate a business in those 5 pillars. I begin to drill into the area that they're most suffering or they're undeveloped in. I typically am finding a people problem in that developmental issue. And then by solving the people issue, I oftentimes solve the entire business issue.
That is amazing. Guys, listen, if I could take a pause here for a second. If you're an entrepreneur watching this channel right now, you need to absorb everything Eddie's saying, because these are all fundamental principles that will breathe life into your business if you have those drags in your business. Marines always use the motto, Eddie, called high speed, low drag. High speed, low drag. And I always try to get rid of drag. If there's drag in the fulfillment process, we're trying to remove it in our business. And if there's drag in the operational process, we're trying to remove it. Or we're trying to remove steps of having too many complicated steps in the process.
Sure.
And so very interesting elements to this. So you've scaled a mass amount of businesses, Eddie. What's the differences between scaling and scaling well? Because you had just pointed out or indicated that you can grow as fast as a business will allow you to.
Yeah, scaling and scaling well. That's a great great thought, great question. I can scale anything, but scaling well is doing it without resistance and pain. Oftentimes, what I notice about entrepreneurs and business owners is they're growing their business well, but there's a lot of pain and a lot of suffering involved. If you're going to scale your company well, you're going to do it without that pain and resistance. The way that you do that is by building the right foundation. And I'll tell you that a good leader is not just someone who takes people from point A to point B. That's what people do when they're trying to scale.
That's right.
A good leader takes them from point A to point B while making them better, making them leaders, right? That's what I like to say about my businesses is that if I bought a business today, and I buy businesses all the time, and I'm going to scale that business, not only do I want to, let's say maybe the model's 10x. Not only do I want to 10 times that business, I actually want to create a better business when I get to the 10 times ratio. I want to have better products, better services, better customers. And so that's how you scale well.
Sure. I love that. And, you hit a lot of key elements in there, like, with having the principles that you've laid out when you're digging in and you're saying the last thing you had said about finding the people problem, usually that relieves a lot of pressure, almost like, an overinflated, beach ball, you're trying to relieve a lot of pressure. And sometimes, that's the very thing you need to do. And once you do that, you realize that it literally gives the business liftoff. So so when you're growing a business, how do you ensure that you're keeping the values and the mission intact while you're growing the business?
Yeah, yeah. So you have to have a person at the helm who has the core values that align with the mission. Oftentimes when you hire, like let's say I buy a company, I'm going to hire a leader. So we've been acquiring and rolling up tax firms over the past 6 months. I hired Danielle, who's the CEO of that group of companies. The mission of that company is very, very specific, right? Like, I want to give Ernst & Young service, but to companies that are somewhere between $3 and $10 million in revenue. They get H&R Block service today. I want them to get Ernst & Young service. This is the mission, that we want to elevate their experience when it comes to tax and finance. When I'm hiring, or when I'm making sure that I'm keeping that mission intact, I have to find somebody whose core values align with the mission. So, for instance, our Danielle, her core values, she's very honest. She has a ton of integrity. She's got lots of passion. She's started from nothing. She worked for the big, 3 or 4, she worked for Accenture and some bigger companies. And she wants and has this passion to help and create success for the guy who's doing $2 million a year, right? $3 million a year. And her core values align with that mission. When that happens, it naturally just stays out in the front. Now, you have to call back to it all the time. You have to keep it as a part of the journey. It will deteriorate over time, at least slightly. But if you get a leader whose core values align with it, and then you have somebody who's willing to always keep it in front, you very rarely violate it.
Sure. Man, that is huge. And, yeah, there's a lot of things here that are very similar in what you're doing and how I run my own organization, because I always talk about alignment all the time. It's almost like an engine. I was a kid, I had a dirt bike, and, I had to get the carburetor tuned in so that the dirt bike would run, at an optimal level. And once I tuned in the carburetor and I got it dialed in, it was like that thing hummed. And in a business, when you get the right alignment, you get the right person that has the right, not only perseverance for me, Eddie, but the right, their purpose aligns with the mission of the business. You're just putting fuel to the fire. And so as you're scaling, for you, as you're scaling and growing the business, what would you tell entrepreneurs out there, Eddie? What are the non-negotiables that they must have in order to scale and grow any organization?
Yeah, that's a lot of why I wrote the book, The Titan Doctrine, was I talk about Titans as people that are pursuing that growth and scale in their life. And at one point in my kind of tenure of building and growing businesses, I had 86 companies that I was running concurrently at one time. Now, running them is a very intentional term, in that I was overseeing them. I was a data analyst at the top, but they each had a leader, right? So whether it was a CEO or a vice president, they had somebody who was running them. My goal was to get them to break through their ceilings and to get to their highest potential. That's the place I led them. I was very aware of their numbers, and I stayed in contact and relationship with all the big relationships that tied all those pieces together. That was my job. However, when I looked at all of their lives, I came up with 7 things that essentially they were all lacking at least one of. And the Titan Doctrine actually came by observing 86 CEOs or leaders
Man.
and finding, and that was the benefit of doing it that way, was I got to see consistency. Like, oh, this person operates from a place of fear. The fear is actually driving their decisions. And I saw, oh, that person is, and that person is, and that person is. I found a few of them that would essentially, they wanted to be the sum of all knowledge, and they felt secure.
Sure.
They were the sum of all knowledge. So they wouldn't teach their employees. Well, all of a sudden it began to really constrain the growth of that company. I talk about that in the book. It's like those 7 principles. So what I did was I realized that there were really these 7 patterns as I was watching them that I had to get them to break through in order to scale their company. And so what I would say is that oftentimes, and I'll kind of just lead the thought with this. Oftentimes our traumas create a subconscious reaction, and in that subconscious reaction, we are unaware of the roadblocks we're putting in our life. And because it's in our subconscious, you talked about PTSD, and that, oftentimes the trauma, the subconscious, is all tied to this perceived loss of control. So at some point we've lost control in our life. There's some perceived loss of control. Something seeds inside our subconscious, and you can't see it. However, I tell people oftentimes, but you can see the bad patterns of behavior that are coming as a result of your subconscious.
Sure.
So it's like, why does a woman who is abused in a relationship leave that abusive relationship and run to another abusive relationship? She may not know what her subconscious or why it's doing it, but she can look at the patterns and go, wait a minute, was in an abusive relationship, now I'm in another abusive relationship. There has to be something here. And I think that that's the point where we all need some level of mentorship or guidance, because oftentimes we can't see our blind spots. They're truly blind spots, and they're usually inside of our subconscious. And then with a mentor, we need to pull the subconscious into the conscious, look at it, and make a decision. My 7 points were all me pulling out their subconscious into the conscious and saying, hey, you make decisions based on fear. The reason that your organization is not growing is because this is the pattern by which you're living your life. Are you okay with that? Is that something you desire? We pull it into the conscious. What are the steps that we're going to do to overcome, and always pull it into the conscious? And so I know that's a little bit of a deeper answer, but that was the whole foundation of why I wrote the book and how I grew all 86 companies concurrently.
Well, it's, and I guess we got to talk about setbacks, because, every entrepreneur experiences setbacks. But, a lot of people are like, well, somebody who, has a, $50 million organization, they don't experience the same setbacks as I do. And it's like, no, they actually do. And for you, obviously, you experienced your own setbacks in life, Eddie, even earlier on into your childhood. You talked about your brother and your sister that you lost. And what was interesting about that was you said that you sat down with your mom because you were grieving over the loss of your sister. And your mom said, Eddie, listen, I know you're upset and you're grieving over your sister, but think about all of the good things and all the good memories that you had about your sister. And your mom literally trained you how to take that negative, bad energy from grieving. Not that grieving's bad, but the negative energy that comes from grieving, and then convert it into a positive fuel to fire your aspirations, right? So you've experienced many setbacks and tragic setbacks, and you still figured out a way to convert those things into positive energy.
Yeah. Yes. It is the secret sauce to my life. That those lessons from my mother and father in the worst times of life about how we perceive our life, how we perceive these moments shapes every decision we make. My mom taught me at a young age. I mean, think about the emotional intelligence of a woman who lost a child, who's helping a grieving child.
Yeah, man. Yeah.
And to be able to say, hey, tell me your favorite toy that she played with. Tell me about your favorite time, and get me to rehearse, not experience gratitude, but rehearse it over and over and over again. Rehearse that gratitude to the point where all it did was it reframed my mind. It changed my perception about my experience. And then in changing that perception about the experience, it changes the outcome of my life. Most people, you've seen it on the battlefield. One of the guys that I bought his company and mainly to have him, called SEAL Team Leaders, Larry Yatch, he's led SEAL Team 3. He's on my personal staff, and his whole goal on my staff is to get my leaders to break through. And it's interesting because I've talked to him and his buddies, and while it's always good to get around military guys and hear the stories. I mean, they've got amazing stories. But what was amazing is I would listen to the story of one of the SEALs and then the other SEAL, and their experience, even though it was in the same moment, was radically different, right? Like the experience that I had in my life versus the life that my brother experienced, radically different. We went through the same exact thing. And it all comes down to perception, and your perception creates your reality. And then your reality creates all the decisions and all the outcomes of your life. And to be able to train your mind in a way that doesn't allow a loss to be a loss is it's so cliche, but so life-changing. I lost my sister. My mom helped me turn it into gratitude for all that I had. I lost my brother later in life. My mom helped me turn that into gratitude. When I got taken advantage of, I lost almost $30 million in the first sale of a company I had. And somehow because of that mindset, I turned that into gratitude over what I was going to do, and I became the king of exits. It's like, it's everything.
Yeah. It's crazy, man, because I have similar stories in regard to loss. I obviously experienced loss in the Marine Corps, in combat, and then coming home in 2019, I'd went through this period, and I didn't realize I was in the midst of this season or storm, but I'd lost my dad suddenly, and I had this pilot program teed up for the Border Patrol. And I remember them calling me, and they're like, hey, listen, we heard about the news. We're sorry about the loss of your father. We'll postpone the pilot. And I said, no, we're going to smash the accelerator because I know that my dad would want me to go through with this. And they're like, okay, if you still want to do the pilot. And then coming back from that, literally 2 weeks later, and I didn't realize this until about a year later, we were hit by a drunk driver. Trashed my right ankle. And so I had to have my right ankle completely reconstructed and rebuilt. And I've never really shared that story with a lot of people. A lot of people don't know that. But I've got hardware in my right ankle. And I run 6 miles a morning. But I didn't realize in the moment that I was going through all these things that they were happening to me one after another, because I've never been the kind of person that plays the victim card. And I used to tell my Marines, listen, the mind is the devil's battlefield, because if the devil can get occupancy of your mind, he's almost won the war. You have to protect your mind, because your mind is literally your battlefield. Right. And if you can protect your mind and convert that into a way that you can learn or grow, if you could just always remember to grow through it, you can get to the other side. But if you stop and play the victim card, which you could have easily done, Eddie, in many situations in your life, the business deal, the loss of your brother and your sister, you could have just laid down and quit. And by all rights, the world wouldn't have blamed you for that. Correct. But you didn't. And I think that's important for entrepreneurs to understand, because a lot of entrepreneurs are like, I'm really going through it. I can't find capital. My product's not perfect, or I can't seem to get to market, or I'm not making enough sales. It's like, listen, these are all soft targets, right? They're not, these are not detrimental. They could be detrimental to your business, but if you figure out how to convert that into positive energy, you can get to the other side. You can fix the product, you can get more sales, but just laying down and dying, or laying up and giving up, or pulling the victim card out isn't going to solve your problems. Yeah. And so I think that's a key element in what you teach a lot of entrepreneurs through your own story. So I think that's it's awesome. And I think that's also another way you can build an unshakable business, is control your mindset. So I think that's amazing. So let's get into legacy a little bit. We've kind of transformed from business into legacy, but how do you define legacy, Eddie? What does legacy mean to you?
Yeah, I think that legacy for a lot of people is how their name or what they've done is remembered. I think that legacy to me has nothing to do with being remembered. It has to do with, will it continue on? Will it continue to grow? So I've been building for the last 10 years an organization called Impact Others, where we have feeding centers and orphanages and all of that around the world. And my pursuit today, while it is, feeding and educating orphans and clean water projects and sustainable businesses, um, it's not necessarily that. It's about building the foundation that when I pass that on to whoever takes that responsibility on, that it has the capital, the resources, the structure, the vision to carry it on. And to me, legacy, I think if I die, and you look at what I've built 100 years later, I hope that my name is not remembered. I hope that it's the process and the systems and the passion and the mission that's still being fulfilled. And I think that oftentimes by trying to put our names on buildings, getting our names remembered, we get in the way of the true mission, which is the impact we're making on people.
That's astounding, man. And the next question was going to be about, the legacy for your kids, but I think you just answered the question.
Yeah.
That's what you're teaching your kids. You're teaching your kids how to not just leave the last name, but the legacy and the lasting values and the tools that you're giving people to carry with them.
Yeah, and that's what I want for my boys. Being given the opportunity to raise 3 boys is a massive opportunity, and a massive privilege. And for me, I want them to serve the world. I want them to understand who God is and to have a strong faith. I want them to make impact on the world. Since they were 4 or 5 years old, the question I would constantly ask them was, what are you going to do to make an impact on this world? And I talked to my 5-year-olds about that, 6-year-olds, 7, 10, 20. And to me, it's like, that's all I really wanted to instill in them. It's like, you need to leave the world a better place than you found it. You need to make an impact, and somebody else's life has to be better because you existed. Because to me, I just don't know that there's anything greater than that.
I love that, man. I definitely love, leadership development, being a leader. Many, many stories I've had in the Marine Corps about leadership and how I would hold all my leaders to a certain standard, and I do that in my own organization. If you lead in our organization, you have to lead. I tell everybody, listen, anybody can have a placard on a desk with a title on it, but that doesn't mean anything to me. It's how you lead in front of that placard. How you lead, because, in the Marine Corps, Marines have rank, and it's like, I always wanted people to respect me for who I was, not my rank, because rank demands respect, but the person deserves respect and is given respect, right?
Yeah.
So I love that. So if I could wrap up, Eddie, what's the one impact you want to make on not just the world, but other entrepreneurs out there growing their own businesses, or people in life that are trying to get to the next level?
Yeah. The mission I'm on is not necessarily just my nonprofit and feeding orphans around the world, educating orphans. It's more about inspiring others to do so. My story was, I was top of the mountain, sold 76 companies out of the 86 for a little over $1 billion, and was completely unfulfilled, unsatisfied, still wondered what is life even worth living for. You can chase that, that next dopamine hit, and you can get to the next peak, but in the end, if that's all you're chasing, every time you start to get close to that peak, there's another peak that's higher. And it's
Sure.
so unfulfilling and so not satisfying. And what I'm constantly trying to push people towards is like, that if you cannot anchor into purpose, and if you're not making impact on other people's lives, you're never going to actually experience fulfillment. Fulfillment is what we should be pursuing, because in fulfillment, it makes everyone else around us better. Fulfillment, it's impossible to experience fulfillment while being greedy, while being self-serving, while being selfish. It's impossible. However, true fulfillment is helping someone else. And then in helping someone else, it's like, you begin to create that domino effect, that butterfly effect. And so that's the mission I'm on. I do it in a little bit different way because of the way that I did it, right? Like I just spoke at a big insurance company or a conference, and 3,000 insurance guys, and they're all crushing it, and they're all 25, 30 years old, and they're all making hundreds of thousands, millions of dollars. And I told them, I said, hey guys, Get the, if you got to buy a jet to figure out that that's not fulfilling, hurry up and get there. If you got to go buy the Lamborghini or the
Wow.
Ferrari, hurry up and do it, because,
I love it.
stop messing around, go get it, because you're going to be standing out in front of that Ferrari one day going, this thing doesn't bring me happiness. Shortcut the
I
line and
love it.
realize that happiness comes from fulfillment. But if you can't get there, hurry up and get to the success you want, because it'll help you get to
I
fulfillment.
love that, dude. Yeah. Yeah. I used to tell Marines all the time, cut the ripcord.
Yep.
Just cut the ripcord and get to the source.
Yep.
That is amazing. And it's funny too, Eddie, and I got to say this, I guess. I never realized, like, I was the career Marine. I was going to stay in the Marine Corps my entire life. And the day that I had the epiphany, and I believe this epiphany was from God, that I was going to get out of the Marine Corps, I woke up and I just received word that I was getting promoted to E6. Like, that's like in the Marine Corps, that's like you made it. You made it to the staff NCO ranks. And I remember waking up and I'm like, and I'm in Baghdad. Like, we had conquered Baghdad. And we're in Baghdad, and I'm in my sleeping bag, and I wake up and I'm like, I think I'm gonna get out of the Marine Corps. And so I went to my company commander, and it was almost like a high definition dream. I just knew that I wanted to get out. I realized right then and there, like, I didn't have it all thought out. I didn't have a plan, but I just knew that I was going to get out. And so for me, that was, I was completely, and I talked about being definitive. That's when I knew that, it was all going to work out, because I just knew in my heart that my heart was talking, and I wanted to get out of the Corps, and I wanted to experience life, because I felt like I had reached my level of fulfillment in the Marine Corps, if that makes any sense.
Sure.
And I wanted to go outside of the Marine Corps and do it all over again to prove that I could do it again. And I think that's what led me to becoming my own entrepreneur, because I realized I'm not satisfied making six figures a year being a network engineer. I wanted to do more, and I wanted to serve, right? So I think and I think it's amazing, because I think you set that example. And but it's definitely been an honor, Eddie. Is there anything that you want to convey on this podcast to other people out there?
No, nothing more than we are currently putting on the world's largest business tour. It's called the Aspire Tour. And we've been trying to inspire business leaders all around the nation by doing this tour every single month. We put 3,000 to 5,000 business people in a auditorium or stadium or whatever every single month. And I'd love to just invite a lot of your audience out to check that out. We've got all walks of life and business, and to really try to inspire them. But then our ultimate push is to live a life of purpose. Find the success you want, but make sure you're spending that on others, not yourself.
I love that, man. Eddie, thank you for being genuine, man, and thank you for being on our podcast. And listen, if you're an entrepreneur out there, we're going to make some mentions below in our podcast and some shout outs to Eddie. But listen, this is what business is about. And this is you're talking about grassroots of how to grow a business and the purpose and fulfillment behind your business. This is it, folks. So please take all of this into consideration and listen to the advice that Eddie gave us during this podcast. And until next time, we want to thank everybody for joining the Secure the Perimeter podcast and for all the great content. And we'll certainly be sure to bring you more great leaders in business and entrepreneurship. And so until next time, thank you for joining the Secure the Perimeter podcast.